In one of his lessons, just before the publication of the Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze argued that a crisis occurs when something flows over a society, over its social body, which we don't know what it is. Something flows that is not coded, that it even appears as the uncoded, and which also threatens to carry society away to a sort of deterritorialization, to dissolve the earth upon which society has set itself up. So I wonder whether you see in the contemporary political and social scene in Europe any new code emerging.
Thank you. It's a great idea to start with the Deleuze's Guattarian reading of what we call advanced capitalism, because we don't know what else to call it. And over the years I've gone closer to the Deleuzean reading of capitalism as schizophrenia. I think it is the right analysis, the right anatomy of what this monster has become. And as you suggested in your question, we are looking at a process ontology. We are looking at processes of overlapping, overcoding and recoding and decoding of the existing rules that construct our socio-economic sphere. So you mentioned already territorialization. These are very big, ugly words, but I think it's important, if people want to come to terms with the complexity of today, to accept that we can't just work with normal language. And if we are to confront a situation of crisis, of transformation, we can't use the tired out old language that we have inherited from the past. So it is a process of deterritorialization and reterritorialization of multiple codes overlapping, clashing and changing as they go. And it does drive you a little bit crazy, because accounting for the multiplicity and the contradictory natures of the codes is a really difficult sort of game to play. We in the university still speak logical language. We still use a rational language. We use logical sequencing in a linear sequence of causes and effects. Well, guess what? Advanced capitalism does not work like that. So we are asked to reproduce in the language of 18th century reason an axiomatic system that functioned by contradicting itself, changing the rules with perfect ease and panache, always unequal to itself, differing within itself, because it fundamentally does not care for anything except for immediate profit. And I think understanding the multiple coding and recodings that goes on is the starting point, and it's a starting point that for a lot of our friends on the left is unacceptable, because it suspends the idea of linear, teleological, decodable philosophy of history.
So Rosi, can you give me some example?
For example, ours is a system of unleashed consumerism. And the message is, the sky is the limit, as Nike puts it, just do it. And the offer is multiple differences, multiple choices, as I called it, and quantitative proliferation of all kind of goods, data, services, multiples of one, thousands of offers on the net, hundreds on what's left of television, but they're all multiples of one. They're quantitative differences without any qualitative, real qualitative difference between them. This process of eternal multiplication of differences also goes for the productions of subjectivities. We have a system where differences are actually capitalized upon and very valued. Multiculturalism is absolutely integrated into the global consumerism profit. A certain type of emancipatory, equality-minded feminism is very much integrated into the imperial project of domination of the West over the rest. We have a black man in the White House. We have very powerful women running armies and military departments and state departments. We have the gay community in the liberal democracies very comfortably established in positions of power, very often right of the center, and totally relaxed about the right to be gay, lesbians, bisex, trisex, whatever we have become. So we have multiple differences also at the level of the construction of subjectivities, but this process of differings are disconnected from the liberatory potential of the traditional understanding of what different people ought to be like. An example, feminism was never supposed to be just the quest for equality. The idea was a feminist was a politically processed subject that would make a difference in the world. Making a difference has been the slogan for my entire generation. A gay and a lesbian was not supposed to be just another mode of consumerism, or just a different market for a different type of pornography. That we were supposed to be elements of change that would disrupt, transform the family, the way we practice sexuality, the law, etc. Black post-colonial racialized subjects were not supposed to be just the bourgeoisie of the third world. They were supposed to be the antidote, the alternative. There was an expectation in emancipatory Hegelian Marxist thinking that people who were marked off as different would make a difference. And in this Hegelian system, to be other is to be other than. It is a dialectical system. The woman is the second sex. She is other than the man, and by being other than, she is worth less than. So there was a dialectic, a hierarchy, and the expectations of transformation. All of that has gone. Advanced capitalism has beautifully sucked in, assimilated, transformed, and subsumed the very subject that should have been, were expected to be, the factors of difference. So we have differing as processes disengaged from the revolutionary political subject that was supposed to be the transformative moment, the disruptive moment. And this is why we get feminism without women as political agency, we get racism without races, we get ecology without nature, and we get fat-free ice cream and alcohol-free beer, as Zizek also points out. So we have an internal kind of schizophrenia, a disengagement of the processes of coding and recoding from the empirical referent, the political subjects that were supposed to be the historical agents of this. As a result of this, capitalization has crossed all kind of borders. We have capitalization across the multiple differences. Animals, seeds, plants, the earth as a whole is interesting as a market for advanced capitalism. All that lives, and I don't completely agree with his politics, but Nicholas Rose has an interesting take on this when he talks about the politics of life itself. I prefer to go with Melinda Cooper on this and talk about life as surplus, life being living organisms of all kinds, human and non-human. And that I think that merry, mindless post-anthropocentrism of advanced capitalism is also part of its incredible strength. We know from the work of Vandana Shiva what companies like Monsanto are doing to seeds and cells and the genetic code of all of our basic earth others. All of that completely controlled, commercialized, commodified, all that lives. And I think that biogenetic structure of advanced capitalism means that they have pretty much reterritorialized, and the planet as a whole, through our very, very advanced science and technology machinery, of which I'm also very proud. I mean, I am a scientist, I love science. However, it's also very clear that we have been able to control, reterritorialize just about all there is to clone and to copy. To go a step further in the recent development over the last 10 years is moving very, very fast. We have moved from the mere consumption and commodification of all that lives, even through biogenetic takeover, to the construction of new life forms, the construction of new ways of living, new living matter, whether it is biogenetic, neural, the new expanding field of synthetic biology through various forms of stem cell research and genetic engineering, or whether it is the second life of the digital world, in which billions of people now truly live. So again, you may say, a great deterritorializing moment, internet, the net, immediately reterritorialize a gigantic shopping mall. What are people selling? They're selling your life data, your preferences.
Apart from the production of new codes, do you see any old code that is particularly pernicious for you? For instance, I'm thinking about the resurgence of hyper-nationalist populisms.
A lot of old codes are being reintroduced. One, as I mentioned before, well, this is dangerous. One of the codes that is circulating is the reintroduction of the ancient morality to cover a post-human, post-anthropocentric world order. That is the world order that is beyond the human and, in fact, beyond species thinking, reintroducing the old morality of the 19th century, really. Here, the Catholic Church, but most churches have a few things to answer for, and there will be more and more punitive and strict rules on sexuality, reproduction, and abortion in order to produce the impression that we are still a moral society, whereas we are absolutely Nietzschean and beyond that. So some old codes like this. Also, very much because of the mobility and circulation that goes together with this type of economy that we're in, circulation of data, of capital, of information, because of the flux and mobility of this, a lot of reaction against, a lot of fear of the mobility that comes with this system, whether the mobility is the circulation of data, flow, information, capital, or whether the mobility is the global migration and the presence of others in our rank and file of our society. There is a lot of resistance to it from what's left of the working class in Europe, and the working class in Europe is still there, and I think in the UK it disappeared a bit earlier thanks to Thatcher, and the continent we still are holding on to some working class culture, but the little white working men essentially who have been wiped out by the coming of digital culture are not in any good mood about the coming of either the much hated technology that takes their jobs or the equally much hated foreigners who come to do the job for less pay than they have been able to negotiate it through decennia of trade union activism. So you get not only the return of xenophobia, but the very painful rise of working class xenophobia, which is one of the disturbing factors in the north of Europe, but in places like Italy as well. And it is simultaneously anti-globalization, anti-Europe, anti-foreigners, and it is almost regional. If you look at the discourse of groups like the Lega, but also Jean-Marie Le Pen, Wilders in Holland, and the very right-wing groups in countries like Norway and Finland. They're nationalists, but they're really regionalists. They really are defending very localized identity. These codes are somehow the return of populism and nationalism, but the return, you never go back to the same place. It's also a transformation of this kind of racist reflex from a class, and they're not the only one, but from the working class angle, it really is a class that feels threatened, that is vulnerable. And I think the vulnerable white working class male body needs to be looked at a little bit more carefully. One of my criticisms, even of my political culture, feminism, queer studies, etc., is that we really only take sexuality as the indicator of how bodies are being constructed. I think we need to look at age and masculinity, whiteness, the categories that appear to be dominant, but which probably are not as dominant as they used to be. And there is also an upper class, of course, nationalism, but one of the paradoxes of today is that you will find the elites across Europe being global-minded, pro-European, very tolerant, very into diversity and multiculturalism, and of course the outskirts of the cities where the working class coexists with the new coming migrants, feeling very differently about it. And again, these disruptions of the relationship center to margins within the same culture is one of the examples of the schizophrenia of the day, and again very difficult for us to analyze as social scientists.
So when you say we should focus on value, this transformative energy, transformative activity, what do you have in mind in concrete terms? How we can think in transformative terms?
The transformative gesture is seldom the spectacular gesture, and it is never the individual solitary gesture. It is a collective activity. And for me, the prototype is adapted from classical feminism, what we call the politics of location. That is to say, consciousness raising about the place from where you're speaking and acting. And a politics of location begins with the consciousness raising about your own particular role in the scheme of things, analyzed in classical terms according to the great sociological variable, gender, class, age, etc. I think what we need at this particular point is a serious collective discussion about masculinities and the role of masculinities in the public sphere at all levels, starting from the assumption that I made before, that the system that we are in now has disconnected processes of difference from the political subject, the empirical subject that used to carry them. Since deconstruction, postmodernism, nomadic theory, queer theory, masculinity and femininity are institutions to which both men and women subscribe and with which they identify in different degrees. So it's not that masculinity equals man, femininity equals women. That is the old world. Since the 80s, we know better. Since psychoanalysis, nomadism, deconstruction, we know better. But there are models of masculinities being enacted by men and women and gays and lesbians and all kind of other social agents that are that are circulating scot-free, that are not being adequately analyzed. One of them is the idea that the political actor needs to be ready for violent action, and if you don't, well, you're not being political, you're being something else. And another one would be that the religious body is not a political body, which the current Pope Francis is going to change for us in a reactionary direction. There are many sort of, I would call them almost stereotypical assumptions about masculinity and femininity circulating that we are not discussing, because for the bad political masters of today, discussing femininity and masculinity or discussing whiteness is not political. Okay? What is political is always something to do with capital, profit, money, as if money was the political act. Oh, of course, capital, absolutely, but capital constructs new subjectivities, and even a homeless person has a gender issue. There are gender issues even in the homeless community, so we need to be more detailed, more accurate about the cartographies of the different subjectivity we're constructing and work together to transform them at the level of raising the consciousness, and through discussion see how we can move this along.
You were just referring to a tension between life and death in a regime of biogenetic globalized capitalism, and I wonder how that enters this scene, and how does it affect a politics of Zoe and Bios?
One of the disturbing consequences of the reading of advanced capitalism that I deduce a bit from Deleuze and much from feminism is the capitalizing on all that lives, human and non-human life forms, obviously redefines the relationship to death and dying as well. And it does so both sort of actively and passively. Actively, we are redefining the relationship to death through the new politics of dying that we're actively enforcing through wars, but also health policies, famine, and the question of the global debt, the third world debt, and sort of population control. Achille Mbembe calls this the necro-political phase of biopolitics. And biopolitics is politics, the management of the living. But the management of the living entails, without contradiction, the management of the dying. Who is left to live? who is left to die. And today, there are many ways you can represent this. One is, as I said, populations and casualties that we know the numbers of, and casualties that we don't know the numbers of, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Horn of Africa, in the multiple refugees camps that are now dotting the space of the planet. So casualties, but also insured and non-insured body, overinsured and underinsured body. The question of health insurance, being part of a welfare system or not, but also state of India versus Switzerland on the acquisitions of retroactive viral drugs for HIV. And before that, the state of South Africa against the biochemical company, pharmaceutical companies, on being able to acquire the medicines that you need to stop pandemic diseases. There is a management of the living and the dying that is integrated into the advanced capitalist management, financial investment of life processes. I think follow the pharmaceutics, follow the health, what used to be the healthcare, which is now a massive, of course, financial sector, and follow the Swiss always. So this is the more active ways in which, and I think this is trackable. We can analyze this, and there are new areas of the university, peace and conflict studies centers, that are doing exactly this, looking at the new management of war, and with that epidemics, famines, population control, casualties. There are corpses that matter and corpses that don't matter. And I think that is a great novelty in the biopolitical analysis. I would argue we need to do a lot more with death. Passively, the whole question of death and dying concerns the non-human element of this. And people always call this the climate change, the environmental crisis, but of course it is a systematic depletion of the life forms on Earth. Systematic. And I think the depletion, the impoverishment of the Earth for the sake of a digital and biogenetic reproduction of life, control by advanced capitalism, is absolutely one of the great schizophrenic moments of our culture. Again, I want to quote people like Vandana Shiva who are really doing the work of tracking this, which means that the Zoe non-human life that will die, I think there are species dying now, there's dozens dying, that will disappear on what we used to call planet Earth, will probably be preserved to a very large extent through stem cell research and biogenetics. We are seeing this now with the Bengali tigers, with the pink freshwater dolphins, species which are pretty much being extinct, but we can preserve them and clone them in zoos and laboratories, and they will enter the second life of advanced capitalism as specimen. And you also probably know that the seed banks of the colonial era at the Kew Garden is being used to clone and reproduce plants that since have become extinct in the third world. So it's this duplication of life that causes that not even causes, relies upon, assumes and subsumes the depletion of the natural resources. That is one of the most extraordinary, the most cruel, I think, perverse elements of our system. So from here I want to get to the question about debt and indebtedness. There is a precedent for the discussion on debt, and that really is the depletion of the third world resources through colonialism, and then the spin-offs of that in the post-war structural readjustment funds and all the things that the IMF has been doing. The systematic impoverishment, the looting, quite simply, of both the natural resources, the mineral resources, of territories that the Europeans colonized, is the precedent. And I think what's happening to us now is that all of that is coming home. In the same way that fascism was colonialism coming home in the 30s, now the impoverishment of Europe today is a coming home of policies that we have actively implemented in the third world since the Second World War. Structural readjustment plans that are doing to the south of Europe what we had been doing to the south of the world. I think we need much more intersectional analysis here of the economic and the historical precedents of this. I'm thinking of the work of Norina Hirtz in the book The Silence Takeover about the growth of a debt economy, and her second book IOU, in which she talks about cancelling the third world debt as a responsibility that the first world has, and because we've made so much money out of them that to even call it the third world debt is quite simply outrageous. And I think I would argue the same for the debt of Greece and others, where I know perfectly what we all know, that the Dutch and the German banks have made an enormous amount of money out of this, to even call it debt.
Following Deleuze, you have been keen in assuming a perspective on subjectivity, which escapes, to say with Deleuze, the Papa, Mamma, Me triangulation, father, mother, and child, and assumes a subject which is immersed, completely, fully immersed in and also immanent to a relation of non-human objects. To what extent your emphasis on a generalized becoming infrahuman of Zoe help us to understand our condition of in-depth subjects, which is at least one of the conditions that we have as subjects, as citizens. And I'm thinking here to Maurizio Lazzarato image of the debit card that we have in our own wallet, and which immediately connects us to a relational world of objects.
The debit card that connects us to a network of ATM machines that are going to make sure that we get more and more indebted is a wonderful Deleuzian sort of nomadic figuration for the extended consumeristic self that we are becoming. There's no question that consume more, shop more, another credit card is the type of financial bulimia that the system is pouring into your average citizen. It really is bulimic, and there is no wonder. I would connect it absolutely to what's happening to bodies. Matthew Fuller is working on the obesity epidemics as two things. On the one hand, people doing exactly what advanced capitalism wants them to do, shop and eat. And the same advanced capitalism, because it is a perverse schizophrenic machine, wants them to be rich and healthy and thin and forever young. So the totally schizophrenic message, shop and eat, but be young, rich and healthy, which is of course contrary. Food pornography, the pornography of food in our culture, shopping malls, the nauseating smell of oil and other garbage food in shopping malls. So on the one hand, the obese body does exactly what it is. It is forever spending in excess of its capacity. And it's forever starving because junk food doesn't help you. This is the second argument, part of the argument for Matthew Fuller. It is the obese body is just a container for the toxic quasi-food, Matthew calls it quasi-food, that the system is simply dumping into mostly the lesser educated, lesser well-off sector of the population, who else buys a hamburger for 90p's, which is at the price I saw yesterday in Camden. So toxic non-food for the people actually who don't have the money, but they need to consume, because if you don't consume, you don't exist. It's a fantastic, it's not a metaphor, it's a figuration of how our bodies are intersecting with this culture where spending in excess of, consuming in excess of, is what you're supposed to do. But guess what? You have to be fit and healthy and lean and not be over-indebted, because if you're over-indebted, we are going to crack down on you and you're going to be a naughty boy and you're going to be put on punitive measure. Mad if you do, and damned if you do, and damned if you don't. It is really one of the schizophrenic loops of today.
Several commentators have bring psychoanalytical perspectives on that, and it seems to me the result is that there is a sort of symmetry that has been produced between a psychoanalytic understanding of desire and that. So I guess the crucial issue here is how should we conceptualize desire and affect? So is a psychoanalytic understanding of desire something which risks obscuring the way, the specific modalities through which that operates nowadays?
What I really like about your approach is that you always make things complicated, of course. If the logic of indebtment and obesity in the excess, the logic of excess index on consumerism in advanced capitalism is entropic, I mean, it always zeroes out. You always need, and the thing about junk food is you're hungry 2 minutes later. It's quasi-food, it's non-food. The thing about getting the latest iPod, iPad, tablet is that the moment you have it, they inform you that the next model is coming out 6 months later. So you are never up to date. This model is an addictive model. It's a system that works on addictions. I think junk food is addictions, debt and money are addictions. And the addictive model is an entropic model. It always zeroes out. It never fulfills you. People also talk about this as pornographic in the sense that it always repeats a gesture that is never fulfilling. The pornography of overconsumption, the pornography of overeating, is never enough. I think very fat people would disagree. I just want to annotate this, that I was informed recently that there is a fat studies and a fat people movement revendicating their fatness as their mode of being, which is not surprising at all. It would be just very much, pardon, they have all my sympathy. It's not an issue, so I don't want to sound derogatory about this. But the zeroing out and the recurrence and the addictive nature is terribly important for the question of desire. Because in some ways it is a totally negative vision of how desire works. It is desire as lack, which is the Lacanian moment, and that came up in your question. Desire as lack. You desire what you don't have, and you desire to death. It's never enough. There is not one single object, small a or big A, that can fulfill what is a structural lack, something that you're mutilated from, something that you will miss forever. I think capitalism has understood this very, very well. Herbert Marcuse told us this in the 50s in One Dimensional Man. They said they're going to, whatever your existential question is, they're going to answer, go shopping. There is nothing that go shopping is not going to solve for you. But of course, not everybody listened to me. I think Marcuse is very close to the Deleuzean critique of this. Desire as lack, consequently you get addicted because it's never enough. They keep on coming. And I think this idea that you never are up to date, that you never have the latest, even if you do it for 2 weeks maximum, and then your computer is old, the shoes are the wrong color, the tattoo is the wrong designer, and you need to start all over again. And so you are forever in a state of anxiety about catching up with the temporality of the commodity, and the commodity is forever an object of desire that escapes you. So you get addicted to this anxiety because you're always trying to be up to date, and it is impossible. I would like to oppose to that the logic of desire as positivity and desire as plenitude. So opposed to both the Marcusean and the Lacanian moment, a Deleuzean Spinozist understanding of desire as not desiring what you don't have and that you're forever running after, not desire the recognition of the other that is forever going to be avoiding giving it to you, but giving, actually producing what you don't have. And this, the desire as plenitude, desire as sharing what you don't even have yet. For instance, happiness, for instance, sadness. Desiring in the mode of sharing and not acquiring. Desire as gratuitousness and not as profit and consumption. How about desiring clean air? Desiring fresh, clean water, desiring things that are not coded as the commodity that you need to have in order to confirm your place in a social order, striated with reterritorialized lines of capture? How about actually desiring something for the hell of it? What could even be an object of desire that wouldn't be indexed on such mode of consumption? I think that is really the insurrection of nomadic desire that I think I see at work in a lot of movements, notably outside the West, for indigenous land rights, water rights, and the right to even have, leave me my tree, leave me alone with my trees.
Okay, getting back on the more systemic level of debt, several observers have argued that capitalism has entered a new age, a stage of debt economy in which capitalistic relations can no longer be reduced simply to what once was called the domination of financial capital. Balibar, for instance, notices that that economy figures as the intensive dimension of this particular capitalistic form of development, whose extensive dimension is globalization. So I think we have here an invitation to rethink the categories of former real consumption. And there have been observers who have traced the genealogies of that and are proposing to read that as a central device, one would be tempted to say a dispositive in the organization of political subjectivities in Europe. So how new is that in the current deployment of debt as opposed to its uses in other historical contexts? You already said that in Europe we have this return from the colonial world, but how can we think about the specificity of debt nowadays and the recurrent histories of debt in Europe?
Great question. So I would like to call upon the computational systems, the computer networks that do the calculations. There's a famous one in the United States that calculates the national debt by the second, and it goes up and up and up and up. I would love to look at those computational systems and try to understand the maths that do the calculations, the algorithms that allow us to understand and say we are indebted for 30% to this. The extent to which we have become a computational culture and that the computations that we do are non-human, post-human, is at the heart of this. Without the computer networks, we couldn't even calculate this. And catching the computer networks at their maths requires Einsteinian, Einstein-like intelligence. As there was this case that I was talking about recently of a PhD student that has redone the calculations on the austerity measures and has spotted a mathematical error in the computational system that estimates the point at which a country is so indebted that austerity measures become necessaries. And the PhD proved them wrong, and the Harvard professor that had designed the algorithms for that computational system have admitted that they were wrong, but the austerity measures are applied nonetheless. There is an entire computational culture behind this that we need to look at. Now, how that would compare to the rest, I think I was very struck of how difficult it is to counteract this. I think fundamentally because of the maths issue. This equation, tot amount of debt equal we must have austerity measure, this neoliberal austerity dictatum really, is very difficult to counteract. In the Greek crisis, I was very struck by the return of the imaginary of the Second World War, the point that you made in your question. People remembering war reparations, having to pay war reparations. And the Greeks, remember, notably said that if the Germans had paid decent war reparation, and if they returned all the money they stole from Greece in the Nazi occupation, Greece wouldn't be indebted. To which Merkel replied that they had paid ample war reparations. Finland, which is the other country that I know very well, that had to pay double war reparations because they were invaded first by the Nazis and then by Russia, made a point of saying that they paid all of the war reparations, thank you very much, and what are the Greeks complaining about? Now, what is interesting here is how the social imaginary functions, and how a sense of profound pain and vulnerability re-emerges in the public discourse. We are back here to the affective economy of this, and how the unspoken, which is always a Second World War, one way or the other, resurfaces. And I think Paul Gilroy is the one I know that does the best work on the imaginary of Second World War and war reconstructions in the UK, when he says you can always unite the Brits over, you know, the Blitz and the war on Hitler. And you know, the Tories here are the first ones to remind us that the UK was on food vouchers into the 60s. We paid, but we were honest and you were not. So we have some sort of overlapping layering of the social imaginary, and with kind of old hurts and pains, and I would say the spectre of fascism, which is terribly important for the south of Europe. Mussolini comes from my country. It's a good Italian National Socialist. It's something that we have given to the world. And that imaginary of a pain that cannot be redeemed is very much active today. I recommend we read Lyotard on the differend, and that we put all of these to rest, and we try to sort of not get this pain and profound grief to be solved by money, that we settle our debts, and that we ask to see the accounting books and the computational measure, that we challenge the rationality of the system and not fight with the spectres of what Europe has always put in the closet, which is the north-south divide in issues of fascism.
Thank you.